Hi, I'm Sam Berkman, J Street's National Director of Communal Relations, and I am honored to be speaking with Cantors Dreskin and Jeff Klepper. Thank you both so much for taking the time today.
Sure.
My pleasure.
For those who are less familiar with you and your work, can you share a little bit about how you know each other and how your careers have intersected?
I grew up in Texas. Jeff, you grew up in
New York
Massachusetts?
City.
New York City.
Yeah.
And yet we first met through both of our involvement in Union for Reform Judaism, then the UAHC summer camp system. And we're using these kinds of skills in that setting. I wanted to be Carly Simon when I grew up until I discovered the world of guitar and Jewish music. And then I said, well, I guess I could go through that door.
We grew up in a time where if you didn't have an acoustic guitar to take with you to the park or to a party, you were nowhere. So we grew up with that idea. And what's actually important about the idea of folk music, especially as taught by Pete Seeger, was that everybody sings. And that's what we brought to the table. So from my vantage point, I was taking the energy of that kind of music from Pete Seeger to Bob Dylan, even the Beatles, the all you need is love kind of thing. And just kind of almost like a fisher person, reeling it in. We reeled it in, and we took that energy, and Ellen and I and many others, including Debbie Friedman and so many others, took that idea and simply brought it into the Jewish community.
So I would love to start with your musical backgrounds. I mean, you're both cantors, but very briefly, can you share, and Ellen, maybe we'll start with you. When did you discover your musical interests and talents?
Everybody in my family liked to sing. And early on, and I still have a copy of this, I received a report card from my kindergarten Sunday school teacher at the temple. And she said, and I quote, "Ellen's singing of the hymns is most inspiring." Now, what hymns, I think the definition of a hymn when I was 5 years old was something along the lines of, oh, once there was a wicked, wicked man. But evidently, even at that age, I was all about the singing. And like I say, very much American folk music. And I also remember albums such as Bagels and Bongos being on the record player in our house, my father's music, classical music, musical theater. We were exposed to all styles when I was growing up, and I just loved one more than the other along the way. Couldn't get enough of it.
Jeff, what about you?
We had albums in our house as well in the 1960s, show tunes and classical music. But one that I remember very specifically was Theodore Bickel singing an album called Harvest of Israeli Folk Songs. Anyone who has seen the cover will remember it because it has a young woman dressed in a kibbutz outfit with the hat and the shorts and holding a rake or a hoe or something. And of course, we later learned, as Theo Bickel told me, that photo was taken in a park in Long Island. But that's not important. What's important was the music on the record. And the music was so filled with energy and optimism. These were the folk songs of the 1940s, 50s, and then evolving into the 1960s. And that music struck a chord, sorry for the pun, but it really did. And even though I did not visit Israel until I was in my 20s, I would say the music of Israel had a great and profound influence on me personally.
It was interesting you mentioned Theodore Bickel. I think in one of our earlier conferences at J Street, he is one of the performers on stage. So we have very fond memories and respected his views and talents as well. So I wanted to touch base on your Jewish upbringings and see what those were like. And And what was most impactful in the formation of your Jewish identities? You know, the easy questions. So, Jeff, why don't you start this time?
To me, Judaism was as much cultural as it was religious. We went to synagogue as Reform Jews. We went on Shabbat and on holidays. We lit candles at home. But the most important point of all, and this was a value that both of my parents imbued in myself, I was raised to believe that to be Jewish is to believe in tikkun olam, although they did not use that expression, tikkun olam, meaning the repair of the world. But especially for my father, who was very active in politics, in liberal politics, when President Kennedy was running and then Senator Bobby Kennedy, that making the world a better place was our task, a Jewish task.
Yeah, absolutely. Ellen.
I would say that in Jewishly, I am the product of somewhat a mixed marriage, only in that my father was born and raised in New York in the early to mid 1900s. My mother was raised in a classical reform congregation in Houston, Texas. That's the same congregation in which I was raised. And I was one of those kids, as I may have mentioned earlier, who never had a problem, never had an argument with going to religious school. There was something about the symbols and the holidays and the celebrations that just spoke to me from early on. However, I really became connected when I went to high school. I did not become bat mitzvah at age 12 or 13 because my parents then, and members of this classical reform congregation in Houston, my mother would say, confirmation is for girls, bar mitzvah is for boys. My brother became bar mitzvah. My sister and I did not become bat mitzvah. And as a result, I never even learned Hebrew in Sunday school. The girls only had to go on the weekends, and the boys also had to go during the week to learn Hebrew, which was so interesting. However, thank God for confirmation. Following 10th grade, I received a full scholarship from my temple to go to the URJ Kutz camp in Warwick, New York. Following 10th grade, I went for a full 7 weeks. I did not know what I was getting myself into. And when I came home, I said, I want to do this. This is going to be my career. It's going to be something connected with this joy, this building of sacred community through music, through study, through experiential and informal education. That whole world opened up to me. And I've kind of been on that track ever since.
What were your connections like with Israel growing up?
I was not really knowledgeable about what Israel represented, about the importance of Israel to the Jewish people. I didn't really think that Israel could have a hold on me personally until I went. And that's why one of the important agendas of all of our synagogues and organizations is to bring kids to Israel, because I was 25 until I went to Israel when I was a cantorial student. But until I physically went to the country and heard and saw and felt for myself, Israel was just an idea of a place far away.
And I think that's true for many of us. Ellen.
I was 10 years old. And I remember being in religious school and hearing about the 6-Day War, and everyone being extremely concerned. And therefore, I was extremely concerned just from what I learned in religious school about Israel, and it's the Jewish state, and customs and foods, etc., and culture. I had only that 10-year-old love of this country that my teachers were saying, love this country, and what's not to love? So I was concerned, and I remember being at Yom Kippur services with the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War, and the rabbi making an announcement from the bima that this had happened, and And so I remember moments of great seriousness at that time. I first went to Israel when I was about 20 years old. Before cantorial school, I did go to graduate school at Brandeis. And part of our program was a summer in Israel. All of a sudden, living with an Israeli couple in Jerusalem, speaking the language. I had studied the language, but not had much opportunity to speak it. I was in Israel for 6 weeks, enjoyed, loved every minute of it, immersed in studying Jewish education and community building. And about 4 days before we were to come home, I started crying. First, I had to figure out why this was going on with me. I just started crying. And when the group leader said to me, "What's up?" Maybe, "Are you sad about going home? Are you going to miss your friends?" Whatever. And my response was, "No, I have to make Aliyah and I don't want to." I didn't really know what to do with this attraction and this love and this desire that I felt for this country that I had now been in for 6 weeks. And we had been hearing from a lot of different speakers, a lot of different perspectives, and I had this in my head that if I really wanted to be a good Jew, I had to make Aliyah. And it was actually our Israeli mentor and supervisor that said to me, there are many, many other ways to be a good Jew and be supportive of Israel without making Aliyah.
So both of you have had major impacts on both current and future Jewish communal leaders. I mean, on synagogue music and liberal Jewish worship. What has that been like for you, and what's been most meaningful? Jeff, you want to start?
It's everything. It's back a long time ago, I had, like every Jewish kid with a guitar, I had this fantasy. Well, maybe I can write some songs, and maybe I could be the next Paul Simon or the next Bob Dylan. And I tried going down that road. I very quickly learned that that was not for me. I could never rise to that level. But what could I do? I could write songs in Hebrew. I could write prayers. I could write catchy songs about being Jewish that kids would sing at summer camp. And I saw with my own eyes, wow, I'm changing things. You spend a summer at camp. Well, I remember my own younger years at camp and how much it changed me. And now I had the opportunity to teach mostly kids and then later adults about being Jewish, about being a modern Jew in North America. And once I saw that I could actually make a difference, that was it. That's what I have spent my life doing.
Ellen.
It has been a wonderful, wonderful journey, I must say. For me, my Judaism is entirely, I would say, about my faith. I have always considered myself a person of deep faith, and I think that I find that in the music and in the prayer, that's where the poetry is. And that the music, so much of the music that we use as cantors, as song leaders, as campfire leaders, as worship leaders, is aspirational. It's poetry, it's metaphor. That here's what we can be, here's what we can build, here's what is really expected of us in order that we be mensches in the world, that we promote love, that we promote understanding, that we promote respect for all. This is how I believe we use music to build sacred community. And I think this idea of using music in order to be good for peace, love, tikkun olam, hope, not who we are, but always who we can be, who we can grow into. And the old phrase, music speaks louder than words. Go figure. It's often true.
What role do you think Jewish Americans should play as a community that has an interest in Israel's success as both a Jewish and a democratic state?
I think Jews have a responsibility to be informed. And I am constantly answering the questions about how can you support Israel when X, Y, or Z is going on. And I say, well, look, I support America. And do we have issues with how our citizens are treated and how the government is or is not involved in our daily lives, or is not doing what's best for the vast majority of Americans? Of course we do. Do I love America? Absolutely. And I like to encourage people to have that same relationship with Israel. To say I love Israel, to say I support Israel, does not mean that I support the current Israeli government or Israeli legislature at any given moment. I do support Israel as an idea. I want to support Israel as a place that believes in equality and respect for all of its citizens, and for all those living within and around its borders.
What role do you think Jewish Americans should play when it comes to Israel?
I consider myself to be a Zionist, albeit a liberal Zionist. And it's not easy to be in that position. My Zionism comes from my love of the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, not only in the land of Israel, but throughout the world. So I believe in the Jewish people, and I love the Jewish people, which is not an easy thing to say sometimes. I think Israel is a miraculous place, founded from the ashes of the Holocaust, but based on the values of the Jewish people and Jewish religion over time. And even with the very dispiriting and difficult times that we have had in our recent, let's just say recent history, I think often, almost daily, of what Shimon Peres said. So simple and yet so profound. He said regarding the search for a solution to the two-state problem, or one state, or whatever you want to call it, he said, despair is not an option. And if he had not said that, and if I had not made that a kind of a mantra for myself, it would be very hard to go on. Because as long as we know that we cannot despair, but that we have to move forward, even in tears, sometimes, as it was in 1995, when President Rabin lost his life for the cause of peace. These are difficult times. The only way that I am able to move forward is to think about the people of Israel, the people who I know, the people who are doing the important work for justice and peace, because we can't let them down. And I think it's going to be a difficult time going forward, especially in terms of keeping our community together, and quite frankly, in terms of making sure that Israel gets the support that it needs. I mean, financial support, military support, and whatever it needs, in spite of the very difficult political problems we are having.
You are both members of J Street's rabbinic and cantorial cabinet. What is it about J Street that led you to lend your names and support to the cause?
I think that J Street, for me, epitomizes an organization that is 100% in support of the state of Israel. And as I was saying before, an aspirational Israel, a peace-loving Israel, an intelligent, reflective institution made up of people who are seriously considering lots of options for how to go forward in a Jewish, menschlich, politically just system. That's my hope. I'm not deeply embedded in the political scene, and I do place my trust in certain institutions that really seem to be looking at the picture from all sides. And as difficult as it is, not shying away from challenging situations, not shying away from saying over and over again, we are pro-Israel. And we have all these different perspectives on how to be that way. It can't just be 100% all current Israeli government, all current Israeli policies all the time. So I'm happy to be part of this.
Jeff?
Well, thinking back to the 1970s and 80s, there was always a very clear distinction between being on the left or the right in terms of Israel. You were either a hawk or a dove, and there was no middle ground to do the work that needed to be done. And I think that J Street recognized that politics happens in the middle. If you want to make real progress, you have to bring people together. And that bringing together happens in the middle of the political discourse. And so the founders of J Street have figured out that it's only through negotiation, compromise, raising our voices, having clear objectives, but the idea of bringing people together. And I am very happy to be working with J Street, supporting J Street, and trying to come up with solutions that bring people together.
For those who are interested in learning more about you and your work, where can they find more information? Jeff?
Just go to Google, type in Jeff Klepper. There are other people named Jeff Klepper that might come up. There's a wrestler, a professional wrestler named Jeff Klepper. That is not me, I want you to know. My group, my singing group is called Kol Beseder. And I've been singing with Rabbi Dan Freelander for just about 50 years. I don't look it, but it's been quite a wonderful time, half century. And we are still singing, still crisscrossing the country, not as much as we used to. But when we come to your town, hope to see you.
Well, most of my time is spent as a worship leader and an online educator. I'm a spiritual director, and I travel around a bit to congregations, teaching and singing and leading worship. You can find me at ellendreskin.com. Or come to conferences like Havana Share or Song Leader Boot Camp or other such gatherings. And I look forward to singing and teaching and learning with anyone who wants to be in touch. And I'm really appreciative of this conversation today. Thank you, Sam.
I loved connecting with you both again. It's been great talking with you. Thanks again for taking the time. And for those watching, if you'd like to learn more about J Street or find ways to get involved, please visit us at jstreet.org. Thanks so much.